grew up half of my time in Southern California and then in the Chicago area. And when I was in my corporate life, I lived a lot of different places in between. So I recently published a book called The Memo, What Women of Color Need to Know to Secure a Seat at the Table, but actually take you back in time to kind of tell you how we got to this point right now. How do you get to a best-selling book, right? There's a lot of work that goes into that. It's not like Beyonce, you don't wake up like this and then it just happens. There's work and traction that needs to happen, as all of you know, in entrepreneurship. And so before the book came, I started my company, The Memo LLC, in 2015. I graduated from undergrad in 2002, so now you know kind of around about how old I am. And so I was the first person in my family to graduate from college and the first person in my family to enter into a corporate role. I didn't know what I didn't know. I was just told to work really hard and keep your head down, and then things will happen, right? People who work hard, they'll have an opportunity to excel, right? Move forward. And what I found, I was under that impression. And once I got into corporate America, I realized that I was working really hard, harder. You know, they say people of color work 10 times harder than everybody else, right? Just to get half as much. And so I initially believed that narrative. And I was working really hard, coming in early, staying in late, all the things. And I started to get a little frustrated because I would see a lot of my colleagues who were white. You know, I was the only Black woman in my office, and I would see them moving ahead, but they weren't working as hard. You know, so I couldn't understand what those dynamics were. You know, but I realized that clearly I'm not doing something right because they're moving ahead faster than me. But while I was in that environment, work ethic is still very important, right? That was something that I couldn't get away from. I still needed to do the work. But what I found was that because I was one of the only ones, I had settled into microaggressions. I had settled into the bias. You know, I settled into this treatment of people just kind of saying whatever they want to you and thinking that you don't have any agency to, you know, even question what has just been said to you, that you're just like, oh, this must be what the workplace is like for women who look like me, or men who look like me, or those who identify as a person of color. And so long story short, just to kind of give you an inroad into what I was dealing with, I had a manager, and as some of you've read the book, he saw that I had burnt orange fingernail polish on, and he said, you people like your bright colors. And he joked for 15 minutes about how Black people like bright colors. And that was just one of the many things he would go on to say while he was my boss. And I never felt that I could say anything, right? Because when we do, or if we do, we run the risk of being the angry this or the feisty that or the docile this. You know, there's always something attached to when we speak up, right? Even if we're not being aggressive, automatically, just because we even have any thoughts about a situation or, you know, kind of challenging the dynamics here, then we're the problem. So I saw that early on, that I could not, what they call, play the race card, right? Because anytime we try to do that, then it doesn't serve us or it hasn't tended to serve us. And so many people would say, oh, don't do that. But that's the last card we want to play. Like, there's no prizes for playing the race card in the workplace or any other place for that matter. And so I just started to deal with that. And I just realized, you know what, I guess the workplace is just a racist, toxic place at times. And that's just what I'm going to have to do. And so I just kept figuring out, you know, what was in my control. And so as I was building my career, and one of the things that I want to impress upon all of you is self-advocacy. It's one of the things that really helps me move forward in my career, because once I gave myself permission to speak up, permission to navigate the workplace in a way that wasn't centering the dominant majority, but it started to center myself, right? In some of my working environments, I was barely surviving, right? And at the expense of my own well-being. And so the one thing that I found was helpful is that I was going to have to advocate for myself. And I feel like self-advocacy is one of the greatest forms of self-love, because when we can advocate for ourselves in a real way, then we are allowing ourselves to set boundaries, right? And so people like my manager would never think that they could say something like that and it be okay, right? Or, you know, And so I learned that I needed to start talking for myself. I needed to, number two, build a squad, because when you find allies or you find a network of people who are invested in your success, then sometimes the island won't feel so lonely, right? So even though I was the only one, finding people with like minds, like values, those sorts of things really helped me feel less isolated on those days where I just wanted to, scream. And so, as I mentioned earlier, the other part of making your kind of presence known and the way to secure your seat is letting people know what you need, right? Letting people know, what does good look like? What do I need to be successful? And I had mentioned to you that I had my head down working really hard, but all of my colleagues, were moving ahead. And so I realized the one thing that was different from what they were doing and what I was doing is I wasn't building relationships, right? I was at the time sitting in my cube, right? And thinking that people were noticing what I was doing. But I realized I hadn't told them, right? I didn't do the other part of the job and kind of be my own hype man, right? Be my own hype person in a way that is authentic to you. And so I ended up, I had a couple of people who were in the rooms that I wasn't in, and they were able to speak my name, right? I started to build relationships with these people. Both of my, I guess, folks inside that helps me secure my seat happen to be two white men, because I mostly worked with, white people. So I found the people who I thought I could have maybe like values with, like mind. And so I started to build out my squad, because the other thing I knew is that success is not a solo sport. Anything that we do, and you all know as entrepreneurs, it's very hard to do it by yourself, right? You might be a solopreneur or start your company by yourself, but you're going to need customers, right? You're going to need perhaps other people, investors, different things, right? So it's really hard to do anything alone. And so I started to build relationships with some of these people. And one of my, I called in the book success partners or ally, whatever you want to sponsor, whatever language you want to use. But his name was Chuck, right? And Chuck was like 30 plus years older than me. If I had a picture of Chuck and we were, right, if I put him right here by my face, you'd be like, there's no way you have anything in common with this older man, but we found that we had so much in common. And the more we got to know each other, I was able to articulate my value and quantify my worth, right? So it's not just like a business. You have your pitch, right? You have your business plan, whatever. And so when I was in the corporate structure, I had to let Chuck know what I was doing. So when he was in these rooms and they're talking about different opportunities, that he's putting my name out there. Well, this is great, but what about Minda, right? And those things, and once I was able to build those relationships and advocate for myself, then I exponentially got to the table much faster than I would have been by still keeping my head down and working really hard. I may eventually got there, but Chuck shaved probably about 5 years off that time, right? So it's some of those things. And I know that some of you might be thinking, I'm an introvert, or that sounds like kissing someone's butt, or whatever the case, and so you have to identify who those people are that resonate with who you are, right? So again, nothing happens in a silo. You definitely have to identify who those people are. And then lastly, I would say the mindset, because for so long, I think many of us, depending on where we grew up, socioeconomic background, we may think that we don't belong in some of these rooms, right? Maybe the environments in which we've been in have shown us that people like us don't have a place, or what they think we don't have a place in these spaces. And so for me, early on in my career, I started to think that maybe I don't belong, right? Maybe I don't have what it takes. And I had to redefine success by my own terms. I could not let the dominant majority dictate who I was, who Minda was, right? What my goals are, what my dreams are. And one of my favorite authors, she's deceased, but her work still lives on, is Audre Lorde. And she has this really great quote that says, beware of feeling like you're not good enough to deserve it. And I think sometimes we question these opportunities. Well, why did they choose me? If we're chosen for something, or, we try to talk, sometimes we are our worst enemy in the mind, right? We have you have two choices. You can have this empire state of mind, which is I can make it anywhere, or we could have this enemy state of mind, which is always constantly chipping away at our identity. And when we get to these opportunities, then we can't even fully take advantage of them because we've talked ourselves out of it. We've diminished ourselves even before we have the opportunity to fail, right? We've already written the script. And so I had to really unlearn so much about myself because of the environments I was in for so long. And I think that that's one of the most important things. At the end of the day, it's not about a physical seat, but have you secured the seat in your mind, right? Have you unlearned some of those things that have been damaging? And some of that, some of that damage is what some would call imposter syndrome, right? And imposter syndrome at least showed up for me because I did come from a very working poor family. And then I was catapulted into this job where I'm now working with some of the upper 2%, 3% of the richest people in America. Now I'm across the table from them. I'm doing deals with them. And so I had a lot of my own stuff in my bag that I was carrying, and that for a while, I don't think I was able to do my job, and I didn't know this at the time, the best that I could, because I always felt like I was operating in a deficit, right? There was, at the time when you could eat out, I don't know where you all are, but I'm still eating at my house. So there would be the first time that I had a very fancy dinner, there were all these forks at the table. And I'm like, I don't know which fork I'm supposed to use, all of these different type of things. And then you start to, again, because of the environment you're in, and sometimes the things that people say would then latch onto you. And then you start questioning yourself. And I really want you to know that imposter syndrome can't go where you're headed. If you're going somewhere far, I'm sure you all want success, right? Whatever that might mean to you. Imposter syndrome cannot go with you, because if you take it with you, it's going to stay with you, and it's always going to question, and then you'll never be able to do the best work of your life, whatever that is. Build the best products of your life. Even when you have that money and you're on Amazon or whatever, and you're buying the thing, you're still going to be questioning yourself because you've allowed imposter syndrome to live rent-free in your mind. And I don't know about you, but I don't want nobody living rent-free in my mind or in my house. And so I for one, had to unlearn those things. And so I definitely want you to remember that the Audre Lorde quote, beware of feeling like you're not good enough to deserve it, because you do. You've worked too hard to lean out now, right? Things may not necessarily look the way you want them right now, but you don't know what's at the end of that. And as I tell you that, when I was in some of the hardest moments of my career, I was in my corporate life for 15 years. I went through some hellacious moments. If you've read the memo, then you definitely know a lot about them. And I never saw, when I was going through the trauma, I never in a million years, if someone would have asked me, Minda, would you end up writing a best-selling book out of what you experienced? I didn't see it, right? Sometimes when you're in the picture, you can't see the full picture, right? You're just seeing a very tiny portion of what's there. And so when you're able to step out of it, you could see what's available, right? There's opportunities and possibilities in everything we do. And how did I get to the memo? Well, the memo was really birthed out of one of my last corporate experiences. I was living in Los Angeles, and I took this job on the East Coast. I thought, this is great. I'm going to have more money than I've ever had in my life at the time. And it's the title that I want. It's everything that I had worked up until this point. It was there. But unfortunately, I was going into another situation, and I was at my previous employer for 10 years. I was taking a chance, trying something else, want my seat at the table. This would actually place me there a lot, even faster and with the right situation. But I was in a situation again where I was the only one, and it ended up being very toxic in all of the things. And one of the last things that, there's always something, right? There's always something that's like your turning point. Like what was the thing that like kind of broke the camel's back, that kind of catapulted you into creating a business or thinking that you should, or that pain point? And I had experienced this really horrible situation. I went to my boss's boss at that time, and we had this conversation, and she acknowledged that these bad things were happening in the workplace, and that there's nothing she could do about it, nor did she want to do anything about it. And, she said, we hired you because we thought you had thick skin and all of these different things. And by the time we had this conversation, I was pretty fragile. And I kept telling myself, okay, Minda, don't cry, don't cry, don't cry. Sometimes you're just in a situation, and if you've ever, been in a workplace where some stuff is going on, maybe you feel like crying, right? Or you've gone to the bathroom and cried. And I was just telling myself, just listening to one woman tell another woman that just, this is how it's going to be. And it really hurt. And I didn't cry in her office, but it was the end of the day. And I walked as fast as I could to my car. When I got to my car, I broke down in tears, and I was just so frustrated, because what I know to be true is two things that racism is about. Racism can kill people, as we've seen in this country, but the other part of it is racism can kill careers too. And I cried in the car because I felt like racism was beating my career, right? That I had worked so hard to go from low income to, upper middle class. And, I just worked really hard to get here. And now these bad characters in the workplace are trying to take away everything that I worked so hard for. And I just couldn't understand why, just because I'm a Black woman in a white environment, why I have to deal with this. And at that time, it was 2014. And I was just so frustrated, and I'm crying. And I moved from sunny California, to a place that isn't so sunny. And just all of these things. And I questioned myself, right? Clearly I made the wrong decision, all of these things. Maybe you've all been there at some point in your career. And I remember turning on the radio, and Whitney Houston came on, and the song is "Where Do Broken Hearts Go?" And all of a sudden, in between like this really heavy cry, I kind of laugh a little, when you're like snort and you laugh and you're like crying, all these different things. And I thought, that's interesting. And I thought, where do the broken hearts of women of color go when we can't take it anymore? Who's advocating on our behalf in the workplace? Not just women in the workplace, but women of color in the workplace, Black and brown women, in the workplace. And it was in my car, in that situation in 2014, when I decided that I was going to make the workplace better than I found it for women who had similar experiences, or people who had similar experiences as I did. And at the time, I did not know what that looked like, but I knew that I had to do something. And maybe some of you feel that same pull with maybe a potential company or something that you're building, but you just know you want to make it better. And at the time, again, I didn't know. I couldn't see the full picture, right? I didn't even know what that looked like. But in 2015, I started my company, the Memo. It served as a career platform to help women of color with career resources and community and all these sorts of things. And as I continued to build in a space where there wasn't, like now you hear a lot about women of color in the workplace, but at that time, there wasn't a heavy focus. And so even when I'm building this, they're like, you're being divisive. Why aren't you just saying women? And I'm like, because not all women experience the workplace the same. So we have to talk about the intersectionality of this. And again, just kept building, and then started my podcast. So started my company in 2015, launched the podcast in 2017, 2018, and then I ended up having the opportunity to write the Memo. But even as my agent went to go shop the book around, there's 5 major publishers. 4 of the major publishers said no to this book because they didn't think that racism in the workplace existed. And when you have majority people at the table that have never experienced that, they would want to dictate what's happening in the workplace and what's not, right? And so they said, these things aren't happening. They're isolated situations. And you're not famous. You're not Oprah. Like nobody wants to talk about race in the workplace. But one publisher did say, well, I guess we hadn't had a book like this. There's a lot of career books, but I guess there isn't anything on the bookshelves that talk explicitly about the experiences of women of color in the workplace. And so, let's do it. And my book did become a bestseller. It's still a bestseller right now. And it's because I had a pain point, right? And not just my pain point, but I knew that others were experiencing that too. And even though I was scared I never started any businesses before. And even though I was nervous, I had to lean into my courage, because when we lean into our courage, there's so many people that will benefit But when we lean into our courage and push aside our caution, if we don't do that, then nobody benefits if we're cautious. And I often think about it sometimes, like, what if I would have just sat there, right, and just suck it up and took it and all those things, and then I never would have been able to put out this book so that others can feel seen, right? I may not have been able to capture all the experiences of women of color, but or people of color, but this book, you see something maybe of yourself in the book, something that you could say, you know what, I've had a similar experience, I know that feeling. Or on the other side of it, if you're a manager or you work with other people, how can you be a better manager? How can you be a better ally to, you know, your coworkers and things like that? And I just had no idea, right? So never be afraid to bet on yourself. And all of that, self-advocacy was at every step of the way. And sometimes you have to take a risk. And I took the risk. I bet on myself. I didn't always have all the resources I needed when I needed them. But I'm so glad that I kept pushing, I kept building, because even when I kept hearing no's at every stage of what I was building with my company, I always had an idea that maybe it could be something. I just didn't know exactly what that was, but, and now we're here. And so I just want you to remind yourself that, you know, self-advocacy is your greatest act of self-love. When people ask you what you need help with, don't be afraid to tell them what you need. You know, I think, again, sometimes as people of color, we are shy sometimes to say what we want, or there's some time of, you know, we don't want to be vulnerable or think we need something from people, but there's so many opportunities right now. And I think especially in entrepreneurship and building what we need, there's a lot of resources. There's a lot of people who want to help right now. And I'm not saying that that will always be the case, right? But capitalize on these moments that we have, help each other, realize that we don't have to be in competition, but we can be in collaboration as well. And so, again, really excited to be here with you all, and I will pass it back on to Marcel. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Minda, for sharing your story, sharing your experiences, and being vulnerable to help those who might have been experiencing the same thing. We'll go on to start the group discussion and Q&A. So if anyone has a question, they can unmute their mic, or if they want to put it in the chat, they can do that, and then I can read it off. Or if you guys want to go ahead. Denasia.
Hi, can you hear me?
Go ahead. Yes.
Okay, cool. Hi, I'm Denasia. So I had a question. So I was wondering, when you do take a stance in the workplace, or if you do, you know, stand up for yourself or defend yourself in a situation where you're experiencing racism and you receive backlash where, like, either you're reported to HR or even considered to be fired for being, like, negative or inappropriate in the workplace, how you would handle something like that, and how you would kind of defend your job while still, you know, maintaining those relationships at work.
Yep. Thank you for your question. I think it's an interesting, it's a fine line, right? It's a fine line to decide what is the thing that I'm going to speak up about, right? And so we all have a different threshold of tolerance, right? For some of us, we're like, oh, that doesn't bother me as much, so I'm not going to say anything this time. And then for others, you know, I can't take it any longer, right? And I think part of that is also making sure that we know how to have healthy conversations, right? I think oftentimes, you know, people, I don't know if you've ever heard, but people often say, never talk about race at work, don't talk about politics, and don't talk about religion, right? But I don't feel like you can't talk about those things. I think the issue is that people don't have the range, right? They make it personal when you talk about some of those things, right? And I think if we learn to say how we curate or craft the conversation to let somebody know, like, for example, in the "you people love bright colors" example, I was very young in my career, so I didn't think I could say anything to him. If I had to do it all over again, I would have said something to him, because he would go on to say things like that every day, you know, something like that. And so I think that if we don't have these conversations, then we're just continuously promoting or encouraging people to cut up, right? And it doesn't have to be so, like, heavy-handed, like, Jim, you're being racist and I can't take it and I'm going to report you to HR. Like, it doesn't have to be so, like in your face, but it could be, right? Everybody has a different style, but I think we just have to decide, like, what are we going to do and how are we going to do it? And for some of you, you may want to talk to your manager first, right? If it's not your manager. So you might even want to talk to your manager, say, I'm experiencing this issue, wanted to make you aware of it. How do you think I should handle it? And so then you're actually covering yourself, and there's some documentation, right? And I think sometimes we need someone else to know that this stuff is happening. So then if it ever goes to HR or you have to file a complaint at the EEOC, then you have documentation to say, well, actually, I did talk to so-and-so about this, and you have that coverage. But then the other thing too is, if people don't believe that you're being racially assaulted, if they don't, or, micro or macroaggress, we have to ask ourselves, is this the place for me, right? Because if people are gonna be aggressive towards you because you let them know that this is bothering me, right? Okay, Jim, I realize that you might not have meant to say it, but when you said Black people love bright colors, that was really offensive. So I just wanted to make you aware of it so that you don't do it again. I'm glad I could talk to you about this, move on. I have a smile on my face, I'm still moving forward, right? And I think we do have to call it out in what's comfortable. And if you have to write down some notes, and make it about the situation, like divorce our feelings from it. And then the next thing that I would say is, again, make sure that it's a place you want, plant yourself in places you can grow. Because I think so many times we put ourselves in these situations are never going to get better. We can tell 100 people about what's going on and they're never going to do anything, right? They're never going to change the culture. So at some point, we have to make a decision that centers us and say, you know what, this is not the environment for me. I'm always going to be met with opposition, and they're trying to make me feel like I'm the problem when I know it's this environment. These people are the issue, right? So what do I need to do to strategize? Because I know sometimes we can't just leave at the moment, right? We have to find a new job or whatever, but strategize. And in the meantime, how do you make work for you? What do you need out of this experience so that when you go to your next thing, you've taken it, right? And then the other thing I would say is, yeah, again, I really want to impress upon going to places and fighting for a place you want to stay in, right? Sometimes we're fighting in spaces where this place is always going to be toxic, right? Like nothing's going to change. Like even in my experience in my last workplace, I could have fought harder, but the same people are still going to be there, right? And even when I left, they hired 2 more Black women. Each of them left too, right? So at some point, we know it's not us, it's them. And so don't take that enemy state of mind, like what I must be the problem. Not saying that you are, but I think when we're in situations like that, it's really easy to pass the buck and kind of be like, well, am I the issue or whatever have you? And no place should fire someone because they said, I'm experiencing this. Every environment should provide psychological safety for every employee, right? Because if we have a lot of companies saying Black Lives Matter, they have to matter inside the workplace too. Can't just be external, right? And so, find those places that are going to value what you say and hear you out. I think oftentimes we don't even get the opportunity to say what we need to say.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Denasia. We have a question in the chat from Nico. Is it harder to combat institutionalized prejudice against women of color in a remote work setting? Do you have any suggestions for women of color who are struggling with that?
Yeah, thank you for your question. I do think I think they're both hard, right? Whether you're in a physical environment or you're in a virtual environment, because at least before, when we were in a physical environment and we were dealing with racism or prejudice, folks, we could say, oh God, I can't wait till my shift's over, or I'm gonna go home. I don't have to be bothered with these people until tomorrow and all that stuff. That gave us a little peace of mind, right? But now we're in our house on the Zoom being microaggressed on our couch in our favorite chair, there is no peace to get away from. There is no safe space. And I think that a lot of companies don't even realize that they are infringing upon our psychological safety, even in our most safest places that we're supposed to be in, right? And I've had probably just as many women or people of color reach out to me and say, I'm feeling microaggressed even in the Zoom room, and it's unfortunate. But the reality is the same people who were at the office are just now at their home too, right? And they're feeling even more comfortable, right, to act up. So before we saw them acting up in their best clothes, right? Now they can be in their sweatpants. They're comfortable to cut up, at home and say what they really are feeling. And that's unfortunate, right? And I think that, yes, this is happening. And I feel like as women of color or people of color, or anybody that's feeling marginalized, use this virtual environment to your advantage. And what I mean by that is we now have direct messages, right? We now have a chat box. So if somebody has said something, before we'd actually maybe have to say it vocally. And so maybe that makes people uncomfortable to have to say it out loud to somebody or go confront them at their desk or whatever the case may be. And now you could actually slide into that person's, direct message chat and say, hey, Kim, I saw that, you mentioned something in the meeting. I just wanted to let you know, blah, 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 right? And the other thing I'll say to you is that I think as women of color, particularly, sometimes we are fearful of what they're thinking, what they're gonna say when we say what we say. And I would encourage you that we don't have time any longer to be coddling them at the same time, right? They've given no regard to how their words are affecting us. So we need to say what we need to say and divorce ourselves from their situation. After you've said what you said, you can't now be concerned with how it felt to them, right? And I'm saying still be professional, still do it diplomatically, but let people know, because once we start to set boundaries with people, then they'll know, oh, I'm not gonna with Minda anymore because I already know what's what. And even if they say, oh, you're taking it out of context, you're taking it the wrong way, I didn't mean any harm. The reality is maybe they didn't mean harm, right? Maybe they didn't, but the reality is it caused harm. Okay. And so let's start to practice those small acts of courage. Again, I know that this can be hard for some of us because we don't want to be confrontational, but we know that those same people will cause hell if the milk is out by the coffee machine, or there's no more filters, the paper's out at the printer, their camera's not working, like they have no problem saying what they need to say in those moments. And I think as people of color, as women of color, we really have to do these things, because you know what? We got to make the workplace better for the next woman of color. Because if we don't speak up, if we don't establish boundaries, then they're going to inherit the same problems, the same racist environments that we have, right? And so lean into your courage and push aside that caution in a way that is authentic to you, right? If you have to send them a direct message, if you got to email them, you got to pick up the phone and call them. Let people know that this is not okay. Write yourself a script if you need to. You don't feel comfortable. At least in a virtual environment, we can have our notes by us and no one has to know. So if you need help, practice with someone that's, a friend, a family member, something, and say, I want to have this conversation with this person, or I want to send this message. What do you think about this? I think that we definitely have to center ourselves, because the issue is these bad characters will keep saying these things. They'll keep doing these things. And then we sit in our homes or in our offices and we're playing those things they've said on a reel in our head, right? And again, back to almost imposter syndrome, we let their mess then take up free space in our mind, right? And then we're questioning ourselves why they're, putting a lean cuisine in the microwave and they've moved on with their lives, you know what I mean? But we're still holding on to that. And so I really want to encourage each of you to you don't have to call people out like hardcore in the middle of a Zoom meeting unless you feel moved to do so, but I don't advise that. But there are ways to let people know. And then the other part, a long-winded answer, but is building that squad, right? If you have someone, you have other people, an ally or something like that. Right now, we're talking, so many companies and organizations are talking about allyship and all these sorts of things. When people ask you, what do you need from me? What does allyship look like? Tell them, the next time that so-and-so says something in that meeting, I need you to show up for me, right? I need you to diffuse that situation. I don't want to be the only one dealing with that. And I think that if we use people like that, we speak up for ourselves. I told you that self-advocacy is one of the greatest acts of self-love. We got to stand up for ourselves, right? And because let's be honest, they would be telling us what we need to be doing, right? If we're not doing something right, oh, they sure as heck will come and tell us what we're doing wrong, right? And think nothing of it. So I would ask yourself to give yourself permission to do that as well.
Thank you. And thank you, Nico, for that question. Do we have any other questions from the students? Anyone? Okay. So we have Karen. She says, I worked in the private sector in pharmaceuticals and have now been in the public sector for local government for 4 years. I have been in a contributor role for the 4 years wanting to promote to a management position. However, there is very little turnover, and when there is, upper management is stuck on promoting based on longevity. They adhere to old promotional standards versus promoting on contribution and skills. Any suggestions on getting around this?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think this is a part where I would definitely encourage you to think about your long-term and your short-term career goals, and can you get what you want at the current place, right? So I talk about securing your seat at the table, and sometimes we're at tables for so long, or we're at companies for so long, and we're never going to get what we want in the next phase of our career, right? And so I think that you just have to be clear on, do you want to wait around a little bit longer and hope that you've built the right relationships, or an opportunity becomes available? So that's something to ask yourself. The other thing is, the other question to ask, have you investigated, are there other pharmaceutical companies that you could work in and have a management position right away, right? So I think sometimes when we look at it from all different types of angles to see, okay, what are my long-term goals? What are my short-term goals? And how am I going to best get there? And sometimes it's at the place we're at, and sometimes it's not. And I think that's sometimes prevents us from moving on because we've been comfortable, where we're at, right? But we know that we're not satisfied because we're not going to have that extra opportunity. But if you do stay there and you wait, quote unquote, your turn, how can you still check off some of your goals while you're at this place? What do you need to advocate for, right? So I don't know if you've done this or not, but making sure that you've articulated to your manager or to others that your interest in being in a management position. I know sometimes we assume that people know that that's what we want, but if we haven't told people and asked, what do I need to do to make sure that I'm considered for the next promotion? And I think this is a good opportunity for us to see kind of where our company's head is at, right? Are they going to make room for us? Are they going to make space for us? And I think having those conversations will really help us inform what we do next, right? Because if we have those conversations and they say, oh yeah, I didn't know that you were interested in that, let's talk about what that looks like, what you need to be doing, what stretch assignments, etc., so that the next time this becomes available, we're going to consider you, we're going to put you in the hiring or promotion, pipeline. Or they will say, you know what, you're another 5 years off, and how we do it here, and you need to hear that too, right? You need to hear it so that you can decide what's best for you, because you may be able to get what you want somewhere else, or you could say, you know what, I like it here, so it's worth the wait. And so I would definitely make sure that you articulate to people who need to know, who make these decisions, so that they think of you in that way, because they might think that you love being the individual contributor, and she's good at it or they're good at it, and we're going to keep her there, because we get into those situations, right? That people are like, we want to keep them there, and so we're not even considering them for this. So make sure that you articulate that and you're building the right relationships to make it happen. But ultimately, make the decision on if you feel like you can get what you need from this place, and I hope that you can.
Thank you. Thank you, Karen, for your question. Any other questions? She also said thank you, Minda.
Thank you.
Any other questions? We have one. What advice do you have for incoming graduates who are maybe going to be applying for their first jobs? And do you have any advice you wish you had known now that you know now?
Definitely negotiate your first salary. I think that was probably one of my biggest mistakes, because when you enter your first position, it's probably the most money you've made up until that age, and Sometimes we have this mindset, we're just happy to be here. We're just happy that they gave that to us. And I want you to not get into that mindset or get comfortable ever thinking that you should be just grateful for whatever people give to you, right? Have a number in mind. When you see that some companies put the salary range, so you see a range, right? There's a range for a reason. Negotiations happen on both sides, but I didn't know that. I thought, oh, they offered me X. I did push for a little bit more, but I wouldn't have called what I did negotiating, right? But what I'd say is, read negotiation books, take some seminars on salary negotiation, because it's not just about the money part of it, but it's maybe you want to work remote forever, right? You negotiate those things. Maybe it's extra vacation days. Maybe it's, it's important to me that I negotiate having benefits, right? If they're not offering those things. And so think about it from what can you get? Because if you say, like some of us have monetary goals, right? So if you say, by the time I'm 30 or whatever, I want to make 6 figures. I want to make a 6-figure salary so I can own a home, or whatever your goal is to do, invest in other businesses. If you never negotiate your salary, you never ask for more, you never ask within that range, then some companies will not give raises every year. Some will have furloughs, right? They'll take. You'll have some companies who, so you have to negotiate things, right? Because some places, when you do get a raise, it's sometimes as low as 3%. So if you're making, if your first job, you're making, let's say $30,000, if you never ask or negotiate for more, then it's going to take you a very long time to get to 6 figures, right? But what if the range was 30 to 50, why would you lowball yourself, right? Maybe you don't feel like you have all of the requirements or all of the job description, that you meet everything, but what are those transferable skills? Just because you haven't held maybe a professional job before, what are the things you've been doing that you can tell a career story that looks like you've been doing this thing, right? So are you in a leadership role in one of your classes? Are you, on a committee, or any of these things? Learn to tell your career story so that it adds color to what they're asking for, because then that means I've been doing this for a couple of years. Like, I'm not at $30,000. Maybe you're asking for the 30, 35, because the other part I want you to know is, if you ask for 30, let's say you ask for 37, right? You may or may not get 37. You may come back to 35 once you've negotiated. So give yourself that little runway so that if they don't, at least you're not getting just where it starts, right? So ask for a little bit more, because you're going to negotiate back and forth. So I mentioned earlier the quote, beware of feeling like you're not good enough to deserve it. Don't you deserve to get paid what you're worth? And I think sometimes we don't understand what our worth is, and we let other people dictate what our worth is. So you take control of the narrative and what your worth is.
That's so great. And I think, like, one question that I had to just follow up is that, how do you go about knowing when is the right time to negotiate or renegotiate your salary or your title if you've been in a job for a while? I know you talk a lot about, like, knowing your value, knowing your worth, and how do we build up that courage to actually talk to our advisor and say, like, I think it's time? Is there like a specific time frame? Do you kind of just know? How would you go about that?
Yep, that's a great question. So typically in certain environments, you'll have an annual review, where you'll have that conversation, kind of what you've been doing, areas that you've done well in, areas for improvement, all of those things. That's one area where you could, when you have to fill out your portion of it, saying, I feel like I've been excelling or meeting expectations, exceeding expectations. And these are some of the things that I would like to, negotiate on my salary. And again, think about what that is. If they're not able to give you a salary increase, then is it a title change, right? Again, I mentioned making work for you. So if they're not going to do the money part, what are they going to do, right? So being savvy enough to say, okay, well, right now we're in COVID-19 and maybe some places aren't giving raises right now, but since I'm still here doing the work, you still expect me to show up every day. What would it look like to put, senior in front of my title, right? Can we negotiate the title change? Because again, I can use this in my next situation, right? So think about your short-term and your long-term goals. But one way to negotiate is at your annual review. But then the other is if you're having monthly or weekly or biweekly conversations with your manager, setting it up for that. Part of your goals is saying, hey, I know that I've been making this. I'd love to talk to you about a potential conversation around a salary increase, right? And then over time, making sure that you've documented some of your wins, right? What are your wins that you've been contributing to? So it's not just, hey, I want some more money, give me some more money, but I actually want to show you what I've been doing that benefits the company or the organization or the institution as to why I'm asking for this, right? It's not just Rihanna, better have my money. Here's what I've been doing. And I want to talk to you about how I want to continue to work here and continue to advance, but I'd also like this. And again, negotiation happens on both sides. So when we think about what our short-term and our long-term career goals are, then we're asking for those things based off of what we know we're going to need in the future.
Definitely. Thank you so much. Any other questions from the audience, from the students? You want to comment it in the chat or unmute your mic? Give it a couple more seconds.
Or just a comment if you had a chance to read the book, what resonated with you. I'd love to hear about it.
Hi, this is Nico. I just want to say that I like the little sprinkles of pop culture in your book.
Thank you very much. Toni Morrison said, write the book you want to read, and that's what I did. I like pop culture, and so I just sprinkled that throughout. So thank you, Nico.
And Denasia also said, this has been so helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Denasia.
One thing, when I was reading your book, I remember there was this one quote that one sentence you'd said, you talk about how you used to be deathly afraid of speaking up in meetings. So it's kind of like you secured the seat at the table. Now what are you doing when you're in there? It ties into that imposter syndrome. Are there any any activities, anything that you did specifically to kind of build up your confidence to help you feel more comfortable in talking in the room, making sure that you don't let the thought in your head that what you say might sound stupid to someone? How did you overcome that obstacle?
Yeah, I'm still overcoming that. I write about it in the book, but I am an introvert first, right? I'm very, very shy behind the scenes, and for people who see me speak or do certain things, they're like, no way, there's no way, right? But I still am. But what I did know to be true is that the people who were, quote unquote, in the room or making decisions, they were using their voice, right? And I had to figure out how I want to use my voice. And I can't use my voice or influence the room if I never speak, right? If people don't know that I have a perspective on something, right? Then they're going to continuously create a narrative for me, and I never get to be part of my own narrative, right? And so I started to just think about that. And oftentimes people will ask me, how did you find your voice? And I say, we all have a voice. We just have to decide how we want to use it. And so each of us has the opportunity to decide how we want to use our voice. And so when we don't use it for the things that are important to us, then we give that power away. We silence ourselves, right? And as I mentioned before, when we lean into our courage, we push aside our caution. People benefit when we're courageous. Nobody benefits when we're not, right? Including ourselves. And so I had to continuously push myself to know that my voice mattered, right? And I did have to unlearn those things, because I used to be the kind of person like, well, I'm not gonna even ask a question because I don't want it to sound stupid, right? But where did we learn that? Where did we learn that? Where did we pick that up? And I feel like a lot of, women in particular, we sometimes think about that, like what I'm gonna say, so I'm not gonna say it, which if we really were being honest, a lot of questions that people say in rooms or things that they say are not always that intelligent, right? So if I can add to this conversation, and so For me, I just started those small acts of courage. I pushed myself because I knew that if I didn't do it, then I wasn't going to benefit and no one else would. And so again, I would just ask you, who are you going to be courageous for? And when we pose those things, then we're like, okay, well, this is worth me speaking up, because if we don't, the dominant group at the table is always going to make the decisions. It's all of the solutions are going to be based off of their experience, right? When you're at the table or someone asks your opinion, think about it like, okay, I might be nervous, but they still need to hear what I'm saying, right? And the more you keep doing that, you're pushing yourself. And some of us, it'll be easy, and some of us will be pushing ourselves for our entire lives, but we have to remember that empire state of mind versus that enemy state of mind. The moment that oh, you're saying something stupid, nobody's going to want to hear what you have to say, starts to even come to our mind, we have to block it, right? We got to mute it. We've all learned how to use the mute button real good in these last several months. So mute those thoughts because they're not helpful. I only want to keep the thoughts that are pushing me forward. I don't want to sit and marinate in my house on the negative things. And so I would encourage you to keep using your voice. We need each and every one of your voices, because we're not a monolith, right? Even as people of color, we don't all experience everything the same. And so we need different perspectives, even diversity of thought. And so figure out how you want to use your voice. I don't encourage people just to be talking just to talk, right? Think about the thoughtful things and how you can add to the conversation.
Thank you. And then I don't know if you can also see it, if you read it, but Diane said, "Thank you for making me feel comfortable. I've been told that Asian women are not women of color, so I really appreciate your vulnerability and honesty and making me feel comfortable."
Oh, thank you, Diane. Yes, listen, we're all in this together, right? And I think the more that even as communities of color, I feel like we can be each other's allies. I don't think we see that enough, right? Sometimes we're always like pressing white people to ally up, and we got to press each other to show up for each other. And so I always have a seat at my table for all women.
That's amazing. With 4 minutes left, do we have any other last minute questions? Any other comments you guys want to comment in the chat or talk about? All right.
Okay, I'm gonna say this real quick. Like the opener about the book of Lean In, I actually got a free copy from, I believe it was Troesh too. But I just like the short mention of it, and noticing that, like, hey, this only really helps rich white women. Like, how is this gonna help me, really? So I was just like, whoa, I was thinking the same thing. Wow.
Thank you for that. It's so funny, even when I wrote the book, you want to talk about being nervous, Sheryl Sandberg, she's a very well-known person. She's a second in command at Facebook. She wrote this very popular book, and I thought, oh my God, do I really want to even say this? Because I don't want no problems, but it was my truth, right? And so I definitely, and I know that there's others who felt that way, so I put that in the book. But what you all will find probably funny is earlier this year, leanin.org invited me to come speak, and Facebook. So you never know. Even when you push the boundaries a little bit and you create new conversation, there are people who, even that you would challenge, right, will come and ask you to come sit at their table. So I hope that's inspiring. I never would have imagined that to happen. I actually had to make sure that it wasn't spam when the email came across.
Wow, that's amazing. Okay. Well, if there are no any other questions, I just wanted to let everyone know, if anyone needs a confirmation for their attendance at this event, please email us at the email we sent you the link from. And thank you all so much for being here. Thank you, Minda, for sharing your knowledge and experience with all of us and answering all these great questions from the students, and just teaching us how to build our own career toolkits and how to move forward in this workplace together. But
you.
With that, we can end this session. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I just want to say thank you to you, Marcel. Thank you for everybody. And thank you, Nadine. Everybody have a good night. Rooting for you all. Thank you.
Have a good day.
Bye-bye.
Bye.